How's it going, everyone? My name is Falling Hurt, and as promised in the hype up to the launch of the Outlast Trials, I am reviewing every piece of the Outlast games. And while I've already reviewed the first Outlast game, I am now moving on to Outlast Whistleblower, the DLC for the first game. And if you haven't seen my review for that game, then it's really some more of the same here, and for the most part, I want to say that now that the DLC is very similar, exact same visual styles, with something I do have to praise it for in just a minute, but for the most part, it's the same game. There's no new game mechanics or anything like that. You're still with a camera, night vision, running and hiding from enemies. But with that out of the way, let's get into my 2022 review for Outlast Whistleblower. Of course, this still comes from Red Barrels. You shouldn't have expected anything different as far as who made it, but this comes at $8.99 US dollars, or, $9, and honestly, the playtime is shorter. I mean, it's shorter than the main game. It's about 2 to 3 hours, give or take, but this is a really good experience. I would say that if you look at the 4 to 8 hour experience of the first game, then you should look at this as a way more compact experience with a lot more variety, and it's really one of the best DLCs of all time. And to set the stage for the story, you play as the character who emailed or sent a message to Miles from the base game that started everything off. You play as Wayland Park, the leaker from the inside of the Murkoff Corporation, who was trying to basically shut it down from the inside. Obviously, things go terribly wrong, and you find yourself trying to survive the exact same night of horrors that Miles has to. And that's all I'll be saying for story as far as spoilers go, and I'll be letting some early gameplay play here, but for the most part, you need to realize that this gameplay isn't representative of the rest. Take my word that you're going to be seeing a lot of more unique environments in this than you saw throughout any of the main game, and while I praise the main game for having some diversity, this blows it out of the water completely, and I forgot, and as I replay this DLC, I think I'm in love with the Outlast games more than ever now, and it really sets a great undertone for the plot of Outlast 2 in a way that I didn't see the connection on the first time around. But let's start out by talking about how Outlast Whistleblower improves upon any lessons they may have learned from the initial experience. I think first off, you start with a lab setting. You're seeing a bunch of the Wall Rider stuff off the bat, which is a spoiler for the first game, but you shouldn't be seeing this if you haven't seen that already. But regardless, you're immediately getting thrown into the thick of it at the very beginning of this DLC, as opposed to the first game, which ramped up to that at the end. So I think it's really cool how they were able to subvert some expectations as far as that's concerned, and they continue to do that throughout the DLC in a lot of interesting ways when it comes to horror. Things that you expect to be really creepy end up not being, and then things that you're not expecting anything to happen, it just does. And I'm going to leave it at that. Now, with that being said, I don't really think it rests on its laurels of what the first game's horror was. Yes, you still have the nail-biting chase scenes and things like that, but you've got all new sound effects. For instance, there's a character who is a cannibal walking around with a saw blade. You can hear that saw blade from really far away, something that the only thing you really got a hint of with that was Chris Walker in the first game, with the chain kind of dangling around, but overall, it just wasn't quite as cool, but hearing a saw blade off in the distance was kind of terrifying. What was even worse was when you knew he was around and you couldn't hear it, because sometimes you'd turn around and he'd be right there. But another thing I really appreciated about this experience as opposed to the first game was how tightly knit the story actually was. You felt like everything you were doing was something pretty realistic for your character to be doing, as opposed to the first game where, you kind of found yourself being like, nah dude, just turn around, go home, you don't need to do this, it's dark. But that doesn't really happen here. I mean, you basically have to fight for survival off the bat, and that's really awesome. And another thing I really love is that the notes that you film something and a note comes up, the collectible in this game, you're writing it out as if your body is found dead to your wife, who you wonder if you'll ever even see again. Continuing on with the story stuff that I really liked was that in the beginning of the game and throughout, you see a lot more characters that aren't trying to kill you, I guess. There aren't really a lot of NPCs in Outlast that don't try to kill you, but in the opening of the game, you get a lot more of people walking around that aren't trying to kill you, and I think that's really cool. And there's some interesting twists on characters who played a really small part in both this DLC and the main game, but it's nice seeing them overlap. For instance, the guy with his mouth sewn shut, you see him in both this DLC and the main game. He's never given a name, but he shows up in both, and he helps you a little bit more in this one, but it's nothing crazy. And one thing I will say that's almost to a negative, but I decided I really liked in the end, especially given the runtime of the game, was that the game does tread some familiar territory. I'm not necessarily saying in enemies, though there are some cameos that you'll see, and I'll talk about those in just a minute, but more what I mean is location-based. Like, you're going to be in a few of the old environments, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. And really, all it adds is a kind of weight and importance to those scenes when you do come back, because this is more of a prequel. You're coming through these locations before Miles ever does. So for instance, I'm going to give one example that is a minor spoiler throughout the middle of the DLC, but it's not a big one. And that's that you see the Father Martin writing on the wall to follow the blood and down the drain, basically guiding Miles to his destination in the early hours of the first game. And I won't spoil any more about the characters that do show up, but know that there are going to be more characters that do show up from the original game with a whole new cast of new ones. And these new characters really do shine. I think it's just on par with the base game and any other game in the Outlast series of really memorable villains who are out to get you. And while I did talk about the familiar, I can't help but gush about the new environments, and especially the new kind of technical prowess that Red Barrels does show off in this DLC. There's changing in camera angles from facing a certain way to allowing the character to be transported in an environment. It's just all really well done, and it's not static whenever you're in a, say, cutscene where you have to see out of the eyes. But really, it just makes me excited. I know Outlast 2 was a game that looked visually stunning. I wasn't so high on as far as horror, but at the same time, hey, who knows? That is the next in the series, and that will finish my Outlast Trinity review, and perhaps I'll package all these videos together and turn it into a 20 to 30 minute video. Who knows? But regardless, with all the positive praise that I do have, there was a little bit of criticism I had. Of course, I've already talked about how the familiar environments, while they do end up working out in the end, it was a little sad at first to see, oh, we're just going to be here again. But we didn't stay in any of those places for too long, and they added a lot of context. So again, I washed that away. But there is one thing that I didn't notice in the main game that the DLC did rather bad. And that is that the design gets in its own ways a lot of the time. What I mean by that is there will be something visually pulling my eye away. Say a character dead on the ground or something unique to look at. You know, they did a great job making their levels and their design visually interesting, but then something happens like a jump scare, like a guy jumping at a chain link fence or a body dropping down in front of me. And that's always accompanied by a little musical note or something to really add in the horror. But unfortunately, that music note just comes out of nowhere for me because I'm not looking where I'm supposed to. And I can't count how many times it happened during this 2.5 hour segment, and it's really unfortunate. And it's really sad to see the potential of that wasted a bit. I really wish that there would have been some parity between the level designers and the actual gameplay experience or horror devs. I don't really know how they do it at Red Barrels, but all the same, I'm really interested to see how they handle that in the next game, now that I'm going to be paying attention to that. But really, that's all I had to say about the Outlast Whistleblower. It's a really fun DLC, something I have a lot of screenshots for of the unique environments. So if you're really interested in that, you know, you don't care about the spoilers, nice, really HD photos, go ahead and head to my Twitter, and that is @FallingHurts1. That's all I have to say about Outlast Whistleblower. It's one of my favorite DLCs for any game that I've honestly ever played. It's more of the same in the best way possible, condensed down into a nice, breathable experience that adds to the first game while being from a completely different perspective. I think this is everything you could ever want from a DLC, and it really is a masterclass and makes me really sad that Outlast 2 never got the same. But with that being said, I have one final talking point for this video. For the first time ever, I played Outlast on Insanity mode, and I played it through the shorter DLC because what it does is it limits the character in a lot of ways. You basically only have 2 hits and then you're dead. Of course, you regenerate still, but 2 hits till you're dead, but when you die, the game ends. You have to restart. There's no finishing. You have to restart. With the DLC being shorter, I felt more comfortable doing so, and I did complete it, though it was a bit of a scare sometimes when I'd get hit, and then it was just over. Another thing the game limits you on is that you can only hold 2 batteries as opposed to 10, and I'm pretty sure the difficulties in between the normal and this do limit that as well. But regardless, I thought this was a really tense experience, especially at the end with the final antagonist, someone who we do see in the beginning of the game, and it's really cool to see him grow into a villain rather than the Billy kind of bomb drop at the end of the first game, which if you see it coming and you read the notes, that's great, but this is something that is a lot more visually on screen, and another thing I would actually praise the DLC for. But all the same, the Insanity mode really added to my experience. It really kept things tense, and while I could be feeling really familiar in this gameplay, I did not. But it really was the best way to play the game, and the best way I think that I'm going to go back and play the base game whenever I do so again. I'm really hoping at some point they do remaster these first 2 games. I would love to see that, especially with the fact that we've jumped, I think, 3 engines. I think Outlast 1 was built in Unreal Engine 3 and we're now on Unreal Engine 5, but I'm not sure about that. I really hope we get to see some next-gen port or remaster at some point. I think it'll be really fun, and I think it would be a great way to implement things like ray tracing and things like that, because this isn't a super wide-open game. It's focused, it's linear, and it can look really damn good, especially with some crazy lighting. But anyways, guys, that's my review of Outlast Whistleblower and finishing my Outlast 1 review in full, as well as my insanity difficulty kind of thoughts. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and look forward to, probably in a month or so, whenever I get around to doing it, my review for Outlast 2, in hype for Outlast Trials coming out sometime this year. Outlast Trials, if you didn't know, is a prequel to these games, and it is a multiplayer focused game. There's a lot to break down with what that game is, and if you're interested, go ahead and check out the videos on my channel regarding just that. But either way, that's it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.